Why are you here? Are you here to talk about partially antiquated rifles? Well, you are in the right place today, because today we're going to be talking about the SKS. Now, this is a Russian SKS that was unfired when it came into the country, and you know what? It is absolutely gorgeous. And the SKS is among one of my favorite rifles. Of course, the M1 Garand is here. M1 Garand, best friend, SKS, no longer best friend. But when I was a poor college student, the SKS was one of my first rifles that I ever owned. So it holds a place near and dear to my heart. And I think that the SKS falls at this really interesting point in history as we transition from mostly bolt action rifles to a semi-automatic rifle, but it wasn't quite the leap forward that the AKM, that the AK-47 was. And because of that, it sits in this really interesting place in history in my mind. So I hope that you guys will enjoy as we talk about the SKS rifle today. Now, before we do that, we of course have to give a big shout out to our sponsors. Of course, Brownells. Brownells is super base, a big thank you to them. And of course, we have to thank Ridge Wallet, who is sponsoring this video today. A big thank you to them. We'll talk more about them later. Now, we can't forget, what, Micah? What can we do? The Patreon. It's bussin'. The Patreon is all of the content and footage and pictures that I don't want posted because it is run by my camera guy. I answer questions. Get in there. It is awesome. You also have exclusive access to products pretty soon here, right, Micah?
Yeah.
That's coming forward.
Cool ones.
Yeah, cool ones. So we're doing a lot of cool stuff there. Get in there. It supports us. In any case, ladies, gentlemen, my often forgotten, but most certainly not by me, SVT40s, welcome to the channel. Today we're talking about just a wonderful rifle here. And, you know, it's kind of sad. We're going to start right off the bat with saying that what made the SKS so cool back in the day is that you could buy an SKS for $100. And with that, you get like 1,000 rounds because it was just cheap. Nowadays, these guys are going for anywhere from 500 to 900 to 1,000. This pristine Russian SKS, at least when I got it, was quite a bit of money. So not quite as worth it anymore. But despite that, as this moves from shooter and Bubba territory into collector territory, it is still a very interesting rifle. Now, if you're not familiar with the SKS-45, the SKS is a semi-automatic rifle that is chambered in 7.62 by 3.9. It feeds from an internal magazine that is fed into by stripper clips. A lot of really interesting things about this rifle. So what we have to do before we talk about it is we have to kind of set the stage and talk about how good this rifle was. The best way to describe this rifle is to not think of it as a SVT-40 in a different caliber, but rather to think of it as a PTRS-41. Now, this rifle was, of course, a giant anti-tank rifle, but the SKS is literally a small version, SMOL. So we got the SKS-45. Now, it should also be noted that the SKS was not at all the first semi-automatic rifle that was fielded by the Soviet military. You have to understand that many other rifles had come before it, both from the designer of the SKS with the ABS-36 or with the SVT-40 or many other semi-automatic rifles that had been made. And to be clear, the SVT-40 was in many ways an awesome rifle, but it certainly had its problems. The SKS, however, was a really well-designed semi-automatic rifle. And in fact, it did see a little bit of service at the tail end of World War II. But as you guys know, after World War II ended, production really ramped up on these guys, but at the same time, the AK-47, later the AKM, would be fielded and would be found to be, in many ways, a superior weapon to this. So this ended up being made in very large quantities. However, by the time it was released, it was already not an obsolete weapon, but an obsolescent weapon, where it's not that it's not effective. In fact, in some ways, it does outclass the AKM. But really, it just fell out of favor. Now, Russia did end up exporting these in huge numbers, and not only exporting them, but they also gave out the designs for them to many other countries. So many other countries ended up making these, the East Germans, for example, to the Yugoslavians, the Chinese, the North Vietnamese, and these ended up being really popular weapons with insurgent forces for a long time until production of the AKM caught up with it and ended up replacing these particular weapons. The Chinese in particular really loved the SKS for how accurate they were. So what we're gonna do, enough history, we're not forgotten weapons. we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna go tip to butt. We're gonna talk about this guy as we would from a shooter's perspective and figure out how it is, how it compares to an ACAM like we have right here. And we're just gonna talk about it because it is definitely a cool design. So we're gonna go ahead and start at the barrel. There are many variations when it comes to barrels on the Sks. Now with this Russian version right here, originally the Russian barrels were not chrome lined. Now, however, after being refinished in different Soviet arsenals, they were given chrome lined barrels. Now this is a refinished Russian Sks, as are most Russian Skses. Now, almost every other barrel was chrome lined when it comes to the Sks, except for the Yugoslavians. The Yugoslavians also added a grenade launcher because you never know when you're going to need to just grenade somebody. It's always a good thing to have. Now, the Sks is a fairly accurate weapon. Now, it needs to be noted that the Soviet military doesn't do or measure accuracy like we do. The Russian military now does, but the point is when they measure the accuracy, it's not quite equivalent, but they did note that the Sks was significantly more, well, maybe significant is more of a stretch, but it was definitely more accurate than the AKM. And in fact, many of the insurgencies that have used the Sks have noted it to be a more accurate weapon. Now, to be clear, it does have a 20-inch barrel, but the 7.62 by 3.9, this round right here, it is cool, but it really does burn most of its powder. So sure, you do get a little bit more velocity out of it, but really it comes down to likely the action system just being a better consistent lockup compared to the AKM. And I found that the Sks is a very accurate platform. So I've made shots out to 480. In fact, there's a very old Grand Thumb video from back in the day where I am crushing targets at like 480 yards with a Yugoslavian Sks. So certainly doable. I think one of the big limiting factors is most certainly ammunition. Now, of course, below that, we do have a cleaning rod. Of course, that's pretty typical of Soviet militaries of that time. And below that, we have a bayonet. And the great thing about this bayonet is it is just attached to the rifle. What's great about that is you never know when you're going to need to stab somebody. So I definitely appreciate the thoughtfulness of putting the bayonet directly on the weapon so that you can't remove it. I do like that vibe. Now we have the cleaning rod right here, and right below that we have our bayonet. Now, this isn't sharp or anything like that. It's not made for cutting, it's made for penetrating, which I can appreciate. Sometimes someone just needs to be penetrated. So I can appreciate them having a bayonet on all of their weapons. Now, sometimes it was spiked, sometimes it was a blade, but in any case, the kind of hallmark of the Sks has always been that attached bayonet. Now, moving up from there, we do have the sights. So if you look up and take a look at it, they are very typical of AK sights. We have a hooded front sight, which you want. You want to be able to protect that front sight blade. It is adjusted like your typical AK sights. Now, we do have the rear sight right here. It goes from 100 all the way up to 1,000 meters. I want you to imagine 100 drunk conscripts all firing at 1,000 meters of SKSs. Pretty incredible. But right here, we do have the battle zero position, which stands for a straight shot. That's about a 300 meter. And that does work pretty well at most distances that you're going to be engaging with the SKS. So this is a short stroke gas piston system compared to the very long stroke of the AK. Now, you don't have to feel bad if you have a short stroke piston system. It's totally fine. It's very normal. It's just part of growing up. So the big question is we have the SKS, we have the AKM. How do they compare in terms of recoil, in terms of shootability? So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna head over into the shooting pit and we're gonna shoot these and we're gonna see how they actually look recoil-wise. These different weapons and now see how they do recoil-wise. So we're gonna go ahead and load up the SKS from a stripper clip right here. If you can see, this is going to be one of the limitations on the Sks because it's not the easiest to line it up. With good stripper clips, super easy to load. All right, I'm going to try this out. Sks. All right, walks back on that last shot right there. Very easy to manage recoil. I've always found the Sks just to be very pleasant to shoot. Okay, we have the AKM from Meridian Defense. This is a pretty well-built copy. We do have a muzzle brake on the end, it should be noted, but